Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar hosted by Vault Senior Solutions Engineer Jake Lundberg. Today, we will be previewing how you can run a multi-tenant vault with the new Namespaces feature. I'd like to introduce you to our presenter today, Jake. He'll start by explaining what Vault namespaces are, how namespaces can potentially work with Sentinel, and how to get up and running with Vault. We will then spend the last 15 minutes of the webinar dedicated to a live Q&A, so make sure you put your questions in the questions box. I also want to note that this webinar is going to be recorded and that the recording will be made available after post-processing, usually within a day or two. I will email it out to all of you along with the slides. So we'll go ahead and get started. Jake, take it away.
Thanks, Lynn. All right. The presentation going here. Hey, good morning, everybody. As Lynn said, I'm Jake Lundberg, Senior Solutions Engineer for HashiCorp. I'm based out of Los Angeles, but I'm here in not so sunny San Francisco right now at the mothership at HashiCorp headquarters. All right, let's get started. I'm really excited about this. This is, we're going to be talking about namespaces in Vault. And loose agenda for today, we're going to do a brief introduction for me and the problem space of why Vault namespaces are so important for our customers. We're going to look at what traditional ACL spaces look like within the product, and then look at the delta for that with namespace ACLs. We're going to take a look at what the default namespace looks like, and then any of the modifications for the rest of the various pieces of Vault. Such as pathing, how to deal with secret engines and namespaces, how you can get your policies added to the system and the differences between the namespace policies and the normal policies, how tokens are affected, and then how identity API CLI changes are done. And then afterwards, I'll be doing a brief demo and demoing how some of these things work within the GUI and also within the command line interface. Okay, first a little bit about me. I'm Jake Lundberg, again, Senior Solutions Engineer in Southern California. I live in Redondo Beach, sunny Redondo Beach, which probably looks a little bit more like this, except for the sun's on the other side of the world. That's my wife and my daughter walking off into the sunset there. I love long walks on the beach, so I'm in an appropriately sort of space. I have a background in Unix and Linux admin with a heavy focus on DevOps over the last few years. I've been with HashiCorp for 6 months, coming out of a DevOps role in the advertising space. I also am an avid music player. I'm not a professional musician by any means, but I like to play weird instruments like handpans and didgeridoos and native flutes. For exercise, I like to cycle. I have a Scott foil that I ride around Palos Verdes for people who are riding in and around the LA area. And when I'm not doing exercise or playing with my family, I'm probably playing some kind of video game. Recently, I've been addicted to Hollow Knight, which I found out from our gaming chat room in Slack here at HashiCorp. And then lastly, craft beer. It's a hobby. It's not alcoholism. I've brewed for a little while. And then I also drink a lot of craft beer wherever I go. So if anybody has any good craft beer suggestions from your locality, please jot those down. I'm always interested in hearing about good breweries. Okay, great. So just a brief introduction for Vault. I consider Vault a Swiss Army knife for secrets. There's a lot of things within the secret domains, but Vault is extremely flexible and just an idea of our major use cases. Core use case that most people know about, of course, are things like secret management. So any of our static secrets or dynamic secrets and identity and access policies around accessing those secrets. Encryption as a service, where you can do one of two things. You can either encrypt data on the fly using an API within us, or you can create keys for other programs to do their encryption. And then lastly, identity and access management. So really allowing developers and operators to get access to the systems that they need to get access to. Okay. Now, what is it exactly about the ACL namespaces that makes this so interesting? Well, previously until now, in order to actually get something along the lines of multi-tenancy, users had to do some very interesting workarounds using some of our built-in tools like Sentinel and ACL templating in order to actually get something that looks like a namespace. And so as a result of this, a subset of users could actually be able to monitor or manage their own policies and give themselves elevated access rights into the system. And so our solution for this was, of course, to create ACL namespaces, which will be released in the next version that's coming out here just shortly. So look at what traditional ACLs look like. The traditional ACLs, they begin at the root of Vault. And this basically means, again, as any policy administrator could administer all the policies, including their own. And again, as I mentioned, we can emulate some multi-tenant behavior by using Sentinel EGP policies, of course, if you're an enterprise customer, and doing delegation by path through Sentinel policies. And then, of course, you can use ACL templating to help further the amount of delegation that you can do. However, for our large multi-tenant customers, this really wasn't a good solution, and so we had to come up with something a little bit better. So basically what namespaces do is they create mini vaults within Vault. And so the root namespace is really the default namespace. So if you start Vault up and you don't actually want to use namespaces, you don't have to do anything different. You can continue to use Vault the way that you've always used it previously. And then if you actually want to create multi-tenancy, you can create multi-tenancy from the root namespace on down. One of the beauties of this, of course, is the fact that namespaces can be hierarchical. And so this means that every sub-namespace, the administrators for a particular level of a namespace are the administrators for that namespace on down, assuming, of course, that they're given the proper rights through our policy mechanism. And then any of the sub-namespaces that particular user that's an administrator of can then delegate further administration duties to other people further down on the hierarchy. And so this really allows for extremely flexible levels of delegation of duties. And so we can consider this to maybe be something along the lines of Vault as a service, really, as we start to get into more complex hierarchical needs. As I was saying, this allows for massively easy delegation and isolation of those namespaces. And what's actually very important about this is that paths are relative to a namespace. And so as you'll see inside of the demonstration and through some of the rest of the slides is that the concept of the rest of the pieces of configuring Vault, because they're relative, makes it super, super easy to be able to tier and reuse any kind of code definitions, especially for things like ACLs further down the line.
So paths are composed of two parts, the namespace and the relative path within the namespace. If you're actually inside of a namespace, then relative paths are all you need. You don't have to add any of the namespace information to the path. But if you're in a root namespace or in, I guess, a parent namespace, you can always append the namespace information onto the path in order to access information within the path. And we'll see some other examples of ways to do that here shortly. ACL policy paths are relative to the namespace that's being created, and this is extremely powerful for the reason that it allows you to reuse all of your existing policies. So, for instance, if you're using your actually, let's get this guy going. Okay, so if you have an existing set of policies that you want to share with other namespaces, say like administration policies or particular access to secret spaces within a particular domain, you can reuse those things very, very easily by just going into the namespace and applying an ACL for that. And we'll demonstrate that here when we get to the actual demonstration piece of it. Okay, mounts are the same way. So mounts are also relative and must be enabled per namespace. If you're familiar with the concept of remounting things, you can only remount things inside of a particular namespace or into children namespaces. And so this means that, like, if you enable like a PPI secret engine namespace foo, you can only actually remount that as maybe it's a separate name inside of the namespace foo or in any of foo's children. Oops. There you go. So there are 4 critical mounts that cannot be added or removed from a namespace. And that's the token store, the cubbyhole secret engine, any of the identity mechanisms, as well as the system mounts. And so each namespace has its own set of core system mounts. Some of them are rooted in the root namespace, but there's a large amount of system mounts that are actually migrated or actually enabled inside of any kind of child namespaces. And policies can work on any top level or children namespaces. We talked about that a little bit. Tokens are also namespace aware and have namespaces attached to it. And so if you're an ancestor or an administrator of a particular namespace, you can sudo create tokens inside of child namespaces. And lastly, identities are also namespace aware. Okay, some interesting or some new API updates that are involved with enabling the namespaces, and that's the path for sys namespaces, which sort of makes sense. There's a new header that's available for the HTTPS or HTTP header space, and that's XVault namespace that you can tack your namespace into your web calls. There's a new CLI environment variable called vault namespace. So if your flow is such that you actually use environment variables to denote some of your flags, then that's an appropriate way you can do that. And alternatively, you can use the CLI flag -namespace. Lastly, we have a new CLI command called namespace, which there's a lot of namespace. This is the namespace flag. And we'll demonstrate what that looks like inside of the demonstration as well. Okay, do you have a need for orchestrating containers as well as non-containerized applications from small environments to massive scale? Are you interested in Bouldering deployments and canary deployments? And would you love to do the same with easy integrations with Console, Vault, and Terraform? Then I have a product for you. It's called HashiCorp Nomad. If you want further information, go to nomadproject.io. I highly encourage you if you're looking into doing any kind of scheduling of your containerized things. This is an excellent product. Okay, let's start talking about the updates here and actually show you. It'll probably make a lot more sense once we get to the actual demonstration piece of this. So I'm going to drop out of the slideware, and we're going to start talking about the actual thing. Let me see, that's not what I want. Okay. Okay, so I'm logged in right now as the root user into sort of the default or root namespace. I'm going to enable a new engine inside of this namespace. I like PKI. We talked about Nomad. We can also do that as well, but let's use PKI because it's relatively easy to set up. Okay, so inside of my normal root namespace, I can create any kind of certificates and roles and things like that. That's great. However, now I want to actually do some management of the namespaces. You guys are probably familiar with what happens inside the root namespace if you're Vault users, but let's take a look at creating some more namespaces. So right away inside of the UI, you'll notice that on this top left side over here, we have a drop down that allows you to navigate within these particular namespaces. Okay, so I'm going to create a namespace. I'm going to call this Tyrell. Save this. All right, absolutely. I'm going to create another namespace under here as well so we can see what this looks like as we delineate some duties within these particular namespaces. So I'll save this this namespace, and we'll give it a Wallace name. Let's see if anybody recognizes the pattern of what it is that we're doing here. Okay, so now if I come up to my namespaces side on this left-hand side here, now you can see that I have the options of either being inside of the namespace that I'm in right now, or traversing further down into one of these other namespaces. So let's go into the Tyrell namespace. Right away, which you should notice is a couple of different things. First of all is the fact that all I have available to me currently is the cubbyhole secret engine. This is very, very important for people that are used to the fact that your default KV namespace is actually typically rooted already inside of here. Very, very important to note, of course, is that the default namespace is, is that any of the child namespaces don't automatically get the KV namespace. All they get is the cubbyhole and the rest of the items that I was talking about earlier. Okay, so I'm going to enable this inside of here. We're going to call this KV. We're going to give it secret names. We're going to give it a secret path. And the reason for this really is, I'm going to drop this down to version 1 too, just to have some backwards compatibility. And the reason this is also important, and we'll see this a little bit later when we start talking about the policies, is the fact that if you change the default name or the default path inside of here, you may already have ACL policies that are giving access to that secret. Just be cognizant of the fact that if you're used to using the default secret namespace, that you should also mount your secret paths inside of this particular namespace. So I'm going to enable that secret engine, and we're going to come back here. And we'll do the same type of thing. We'll enable the PKI, and we'll just call this PKI, or we'll call PKI the title. Again, be really cognizant if you have existing patterns for how to use PKI. Those pathing mechanisms will have to be updated. I'm just really showing so you can see a delineation of what these namespaces look like. Okay, that's great. And then inside of the actual ACL policies themselves, I'm going to create an ACL policy. And so I'm going to give this a name of namespace admin, and I'm going to upload a file from my operating system. Now, I've already kind of pre-cooked the location for this admin policy, and the location of this, of course, is inside this Namespaces webinar folder that I have created on my system. I'm going to open this thing up, and you'll see down below I have some administration policies and various things that I can do as a namespace administrator. If you're curious as to which policy items that you should have, we'll have a guide that comes out shortly that'll help you to accelerate in here. But if you already have existing admin policies, namespaces aside, you'll be able to reuse those as well. I'm going to create that particular policy inside of here, and now I have this namespace admin. Okay, now within the Tyrell namespace, maybe I have some other namespaces that I want. Maybe Nexus 6. Off-road. Okay, so that's a couple of extra namespaces that I have inside of here. And then maybe inside of the Nexus 6. Also, I've got, you'll notice right away, I've drilled deeper down into this other namespace. And what I have available to me is inside the namespace path, you can see right away we're starting to get this kind of foldering mechanism from our namespaces. And so I'm in Tyrell Nexus 6. Right away, you should notice, of course, that inside of the secrets piece of this is that I don't actually have any secrets engines enabled. And again, as we start to go deeper and deeper into each namespace, we're starting to segregate these duties of these things. So I'm going to enable the KV space and then root that in secret so that we have some commonality between these various namespaces. Oops, I gave it a version 2. That's okay. We'll deal with that as it is. Okay, and then back to policies again. So what you may have noticed actually is that we don't have any ACL policies for this particular namespace. And this comes back to what I was talking about before in terms of being able to use, reuse the policies that you have for other namespaces. Oops, I didn't do not disturb my, I'm gonna actually upload a thing here. So, all right, cool. Give me just a second. I'm just going to pause this for a second. Turn off my my Slack. Oops. All right, outstanding. There we go. Okay, folks. All right, here we are. Yeah, so I have an error inside of there, and that's because of the fact that I didn't actually choose anything for my ACL namespaces. Now, again, I'm reusing the same admin policy inside of all of my namespaces because all of my paths are relative to that particular namespace. So I'm going to create that namespace. And now you can see inside of my policies, I've got a common way of delineating this information. And this is the namespace admin as it is. Looks like I haven't done this. Oh, just give me just one more second. Okay. Oops. Looks like my do not disturb doesn't want to work inside my Slack. We're having technical difficulties all around. If my wife was on this call, she would probably tell me that Mercury is in retrograde or something along those lines. Okay, so I'm going to go back into my namespaces again. And so again, we've got these tiered namespaces, and I'm going to come back in one more level. I'm going to go into the Wallace area here. I'm going to do the same type of thing. I'm going to create some ACL policies inside of here, namespace admin, upload this file. And you're probably starting to recognize what this pattern looks like from an administrator's standpoint in order to tier these policies down. I'm going to create some more namespaces inside of here. Maybe this is the Nexus 9 namespace for the Nexus 9 division. And for those of you that recognize this is kind of a little bit of a joke here. So, okay, so great. So now I have another tier of namespaces that I can actually create users within and do those things. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the Wallace, and I'm going to create some actual users. So one of the things that if you're not familiar with the new Vault CLI is that, or the Vault UI, is that we've included a basic Vault CLI inside of this environment. So I'm just going to copy and paste some things in here. Okay. Oops. Oh, well, that's interesting. So what have I done? I got a little error there. And the reason that I have this error is because I haven't actually enabled a login method. So we're going to give this a username and password method, and then we should be able to do this command next. Okay, outstanding. So now I have a login to this particular method. I'm going to do the same thing inside. Oh, I actually put that into the wrong namespace. Look at that. Let's use this other one. Let's actually put in our Wallace namespace and put Nyander inside of here. I was inside of my Tyrell namespace. So let's go back to the Tyrell namespace. And again, we're going to have to create some kind of an access policy, an authentication method to allow the user to connect with the username and password. We're going to enable that method, and then we're going to count back up here. Use this guy right here. All right. By the way, I didn't say a prayer to the demo god, so that's probably we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. It's either that or Mercury retrograde, as we were talking about before. Okay, so what have I done? I've created some logins for these particular users, and I'm actually going to go to the Vault CLI and try this. Let's do a Vault login method equals user pass and username equals Elvin, password equals more human than human. Oh, what have I done? Oh, no, this is very interesting. Remember the fact that we were having some namespace aware, which is a namespace policy. So I'm going to do a namespace equals Tyrell. And now I've logged into this particular namespace. If I do a Vault secrets list, you can see down below that I have the PKI Tyrell that we have in here. So let's do the same thing in the other window. Login dash namespace equals Wallace dash method equals user pass. Password. Let's see if I remember what the password stars. I don't think I do. Oh, the dead space between the stars. Okay. What did I do here? Oh, I've got to give it a username. Sorry about that. And equals Nyander. Okay. And I'm going to do a vault secrets list. And you see that there's a difference between the namespaces or the secrets that I have available. In the Tyrell version of this, I have a PKI that's mounted at PKI Tyrell, but inside of the Wallace namespace, Nyander is only able to see the secrets for that. So let's do vault secrets. Oops. Dash namespace equals Tyrell. Yeah, that doesn't work. So what's happening? I'm not actually able to get a hold of that, and maybe I have the commands on. Let's just make sure that I'm not doing something here. And oops. Getting kind of close to the question and answer period here, so we're going to probably speed this up a little bit. Let's see if I do that. Oh, okay, now I have the command right. So right away you can see that this particular user getting kind of a generic error, and that'll probably change in the near future. But you can see that Nyander is not actually able to see things outside of its particular namespace. And again, this is very important because now we're starting to do some segregation of duties of being able to do things further into these particular namespaces. Okay, that's great. And let's see, is there anything else that I really want to show you guys inside of here? I think we've got everything. We talked a little bit about the differences in the policies. One thing is if you're using Sentinel policies are also namespace aware, and so as you start to negotiate through your old Sentinel policies, you'll still be able to see and reuse those Sentinel policies as you were doing before. And let's see, I've got my secrets that are here. I'm going to come back off into the root namespace so we can see these things here. And that's pretty much it for the demonstration portion of this. Just to reiterate what we've done, let's see if I come back to my little slides here. Yeah, cool. I forgot to do my parameters. That's what the problem was. Okay, great. So that concludes the lecture, though spotty, and then some of a brief demo of what this looks like to use these namespaces. I'm going to open it up to any kind of questions that you guys have, and hopefully answer your questions and the way that you need them. So, Lynn, back to you if you want to send the questions up.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. So, of course, the first question is, and probably the obvious question, when will namespaces be released? And will it be an enterprise feature or only Vault open source?
Right, so the release date for this, there's a beta version of this that'll be coming out. I think by the end of the week, it'll either be tomorrow or possibly Friday, maybe into the next week. Any of our customers that are signed up for beta access will get access to those beta bits very shortly here. And then I would expect to see the actual release into the public at about the end of the month or so. It is an enterprise-only feature, so yes, it'll only be enabled for our enterprise customers.
Great. And the next question is there a secrets migration plan to adapt namespaces from existing non-namespaces without impact to consuming apps?
Well, that depends on how you have your API set up. So depending on how you're actually calling into Vault, be it through the API or through command line or through some other mechanism within, say, like a library that you have for accessing that thing, as long as your libraries are namespace aware and you're able to tag the namespaces into those, then there really shouldn't be any change. But again, be very cognizant of the fact that when you enable the KV secret engine, or any of the secret engines for that matter, that you keep the path names consistent between those various areas. So, for instance, when I enabled the KV secret engine inside of the deeper namespaces, I maintained the name secret, so that we could actually use the same policies and any of the rest of that stuff. So if you keep the same structure and sort of the same naming convention for everything inside of your namespaces, because those paths are relative, you'll be able to reuse any of that thing, with the caveat, of course, that you actually tack on the namespace to any of your API calls.
Cool. The next question is, are the namespace ACL policies unique per namespace? That is, can we reuse the ACL name in a different namespace?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So let me see if I can drop out of this. So when I was actually doing any of the negotiation inside of here, you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So for instance, if I were to drill down into Wallace Joy Division, for instance, you'll notice that I don't have an ACL policy inside of here. Now I'm going to create that policy, and I'm actually going to give it the same name inside of this deeper area. I'm going to upload this file. Now, the file that I'm uploading is the exact same file that I've uploaded inside all of the rest of these namespaces. And again, this is an extremely, extremely powerful mechanism because, again, these things are all relative to each other. I can reuse the same ACL namespace policies inside of every single namespace that I create. So it's a write once, kind of read many type of operation. Now, again, you have to be really careful. This is the piece that I was talking about before. So down below, I'm giving some access to the secret paths inside of here. Just make sure, again, that if you're going to mount your secret engines, when I actually mount my secrets inside of here, and this is the one this will probably get everybody at first if you don't do this. The default path for this is called KV. But when we actually do the mounting of this in the default path, we started off with secret. And again, I'm getting a little version 2 issue inside of here. But make sure, of course, that you keep your names for any of those things the same so that your ACL policies will actually work. Now, there's no reason that you have, if you want to do some minor modifications to your ACL policies, maybe you have a templating engine or something along those lines that actually creates your policies for you. Then you could use that mechanism to create your policies. But yeah, you should be able to reuse any of these policies, again, assuming the secret engines are mounted at the same place.
Cool. The next question is, do you have any examples of an API read or write using namespaces?
An API read or write? Yeah, sure. Let's take a look. Let's see. Vault secret list. Oops. Let's see. Vault secrets list. And do I have anything? Which namespace am I in? I don't think I actually enabled this particular namespace in here. Sorry. Where am I at? I think this one is Tyrell. Oh, I do have these inside of here. Which am I in here? Sorry. List. Inside of identity and dash namespace equals Wallace. Looks like I'm missing some of my namespaces. I thought, hold on just a sec. Sorry about that. Let me just look inside my current Wallace namespace. Oh, that's because I didn't actually enable the secret engine. Okay, so I'm going to do KV, secrets, and vault. Right. Secret password. Oh, invalid path. Oh, I've used the wrong syntax. KV puts secrets. Yeah, I have to do data foo. Sorry, password equals blue. Oh no. Grant access to. Oh, okay. So sorry about that. I've got a bad policy thing. So yeah, absolutely. I just have my policy is instead of for secret data foo. What if I put the V1 policy? Sorry guys. This is a there we go. secrets. Okay, so let's do vault right secret foo password equals. Woo. Oh, I didn't do it again. Invalid path. I thought I did this as a V1. Sorry, guys. I thought I put this in as a V1 path. Let's do this right here. Enable new engine. We're gonna call this guy secrets. Oh, and I don't have the proper policy. Sorry, guys. I've got improper policies for writing into this namespace. But yeah, absolutely. It's just I've got a bad policy management inside of here. Sorry, I set this up as V2 namespaces. But why don't we just move on to the next question? I'll see if I can get this mounted as this other side. That's actually not going to work. Okay. Yeah. Why don't we go to the next question, and I'll as we're going through this, we'll be able to use this. I think these are all version 2 secrets, and I don't have my policy set up properly for that. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to answer as many questions in the email send out afterwards that we didn't get to. So yeah. The next question is there a limit in the number of namespaces that can be created?
No, there is not a limit in the number of namespaces that you can create. Now, theoretically, of course, you could probably run into some kind of a storage limit in the end, but it would be the same storage limit that you'd run into with Vault. So if you're going to run out of space with Vault, you clearly couldn't create any more namespaces. But there's actually a mechanism within Vault that we changed how we actually create the namespaces within the backend. Typically, our enterprise customers are going to be using the console as a backend, and so we've actually done some changes to the way that those things write into there to allow us to be able to create very, very deep paths without running into the size limit for console keys. So as it is right now, no, there are no limitations in the amount of namespaces that you can create.
Cool. The next question is, someone is currently using an older version, like 0.8. Are there any issues in upgrading to the latest version?
Sorry, could you say that again?
For those using an older version, like 0.8, are there any issues in upgrading to the latest version and using namespaces?
Yeah, I would highly encourage anybody, if you're going to be doing any kind of upgrades, just to go to our Vault upgrades page. Inside of upgrading Vault, there is a whole host of information about how to go from version to version. So because there are some changes within, say, the difference of the different KV engines between KV1 and KV2, make sure you read through any of the release notes and follow any instructions to do that. For the most part, if you're doing upgrades within our to the next dot release, then you can skip to the next dot release that is there. But again, be very, very cognizant of any of the release notes in the event that there are any API changes. There are some changes within the actual command line structure for Vault. So what you'll notice right away is that some things like like adding in like the Vault operator command in order to unseal versus just using the normal Vault unseal.
Cool. And next question is, what is the best practice for creating policies? That is, can you create policies locally, for example, and then export out to a dev or build cluster?
Yeah, so the policy creation mechanism is the same as it was before. So if you're writing your policies as code and storing them inside of version control, as long as you have access to the Vault server, you can do that through API calls, or you can use a concept of what I did here. So most people probably aren't going to be using the web interface for day-to-day administration of these things, but there's actually no reason that you couldn't do that. And so again, I'm actually just doing GUI-based ACL policy creations, but there's no reason I couldn't be doing this through the API.
Cool. So the next question is, are all auth methods namespaces aware? For example, LDAP, app role, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So Again, if you notice, I'm in Tyrell Offworld here, and you see that there's no authentication methods for this particular namespace that have been enabled. But if I come back up to the Tyrell namespace, you'll notice that the authentication methods that I enabled, such as like user passes inside of here. Okay, so what if I go back into, say, like Nexus 6 and do the access namespace? And Nexus 6 currently doesn't have any kind of authentication methods. I'm going to give that some LDAP. You may see some other things that are coming out in the future versions, such as like the JWT OIDC. That's a little bit of a teaser for anybody who's looking inside of there. And so yeah, absolutely. If I were to do this LDAP, this doesn't really have much information. It's not properly configured to do actual LDAP communications. But let's say our Nexus 6 division wants to do LDAP authentication, whereas maybe the higher level parent isn't able to do authentication methods. So again, everything is relative. When you put any kind of authentication methods or secrets, they are namespace aware, and only inside of those namespaces are they able to be seen. Remember, of course, if you have an admin policy that can control the root of any of the hierarchies, those namespaces can actually see down below as well.
Cool. The next question is interesting. It's a question about policies. So someone asked, namespaces are hierarchical, but do policies inherit their permissions for each level, or would there be redundancy if each level contains similar rules?
Oh, well, it depends on who you are, right? So if you're actually given access to access further down inside of your particular namespace, then those policies basically you can see down below as an administrator, for instance. But if you're not given administrator rights inside of your policies to actually negotiate further down into a namespace, then you won't be able to get into those further namespaces. And so a lot of that, it has to do with the way that things are mounted inside of these policies. So if I look inside my namespace admin, for instance, I'm actually able to read and list the further namespaces that are down below as administrator. But if I don't actually give those rights to a user inside of that policy space, then they're not going to be able to see anything either higher above or lower inside that namespace. I'm not sure if that answered the question or not.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question.
Okay.
Is ACL Bootstrap Feature also available for individual namespaces?
I'm not sure what that means. Sorry, could you say that question again?
The question was, is the ACL Bootstrap Feature also available for individual namespaces?
Ooh, I'll be honest, I'm not familiar with ACL bootstrapping. If you mean if there's like a default set of policies, the default ACLs are always going to be added inside of a namespace. I'm just not familiar with that concept of ACL bootstrapping. But I would imagine that if you have a common way of doing some kind of ACL negotiation into the root namespace, if you just tag on the namespace sort of flag, either in the CLI or inside of the API, then you'll be able to tier those into your individual namespaces as well.
Cool. And we have time for one more question. So this question is, what is the value add of using namespaces in terms of maintenance, security, administration, portability, etc.?
Right. So where this feature came from actually was a request from our very large enterprise customers that wanted to delegate administration duties away from their core sort of systems team or their core security team. So as I was saying before, you can delegate sort of ways of doing administration using Sentinel policies and ACL templating. However, it's not true isolation. And so some administrators are actually able to administer their own policies, which gives them a far greater reach into other parts of Vault than probably your security administrators want to do. And so the concept really is, maybe something like Vault as a service. If you're a service provider and you want to roll this out to your customers, you can actually create namespaces per customer, and they wouldn't be able to see any further up into the namespace as other customers that are there. So maybe, again, I have this concept of these, sort of Tyrell and Wallace. From the root namespace, I can see everything if I'm a root administrator, but when I'm inside of the Wallace namespace as the Wallace user, I'm only going to be able to see anything or administer those namespaces below me. And because this is hierarchical, you can actually have hierarchical levels of service sort of delegation inside of here. And so that's really the main goal of why namespaces were created. And if you're familiar with the concept of multi-tenancy, which is sort of how we labeled this this webinar, then this allows you to do true multi-tenancy within Vault.
Awesome. That's all the time we have for questions right now. So we have about 3 minutes, and I'm just going to close out. So thanks, Jake. Thanks for answering all of those questions, and I hope everyone enjoyed today's webinar and better understands how the upcoming namespaces feature will work. We'll also be releasing a blog post shortly after about the namespaces feature and the upcoming release. Once again, big thank you to Jake. For more webinars, you can visit our website at hashicorp.com/events. And finally, as I mentioned in the beginning, this webinar was recorded, and we will make the recording available after post-processing. I'll send an email to everyone who registered with the recording link, and we'll also try and answer as many of the Q&A questions we didn't get to as we can. Keep an eye on Twitter. We'll post the link as well, and that's a wrap. So have a great day, and thank you, everybody.